there's a quote by Mark Twain that I love, and I probably said it on the podcast, I don't know, 500 episodes, 500 times. And it's, if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. And because we talk so much, I'll speak more personally for myself, because I talk so much about so much, I think, it's kind of like the same vein. It's like exercise and biomechanics and injuries and rehabilitation, sports performance, whatever. I have no idea. Like, it's burn after reading. The second I'm in the teleprompter of my own brain say it, it's gone, because I'm like too busy about the other things I'm going to have to say later in this podcast, later in this day, into this week and next week and so on. So it's like low bandwidth. Like, I have low compute, and I'm asked to do a lot of things, or I ask myself to do a lot of things. So I'd love to just do an episode and like pick a title one day and go like bench press technique, troubleshooting pain, why CrossFit hates it. And just like do a side-by-side comparison and just be like, do I still feel the same way? Because someone actually asked me a really good question the other day. And it was, what have you changed your mind on? Like when it comes to training. I was like, ooh. And I've been thinking about it ever since, because I didn't really have, like, I've had evolved thought processes, but as far as like 180s in like, and this is where I'm thinking like, maybe the people who DM me and go, you guys are exactly the same, or might be onto something. Because I was just like, I don't know if I've really 180'd on anything in the last 500 episodes.
Yeah. I agree with that sentiment. And like literally thinking back to training when I was learning about training in high school, before podcasts, before any of these resources existed, I think I had very ill-defined thoughts and kind of values around training that have just become better informed and maybe even more deeply ingrained because of that information over the course of the last, I don't know, 22 or so years. But there's things that I've definitely said, because I go in on the things I go in on. And I know that I drank the CrossFit punch for a while. And with that, I think there's probably some refining to the thoughts or some of the ideas that I put out there around CrossFit as I've gotten further away from it. But I do think that a lot of the underlying beliefs and sentiments of the way that I approach training are very similar, very much the same. And I think I approach training with the same mindset that I have the majority of my life. It's just been much better informed since I've learned more and developed these thoughts over time. And actually vocalize these thoughts too, which the podcast has been a really good outlet for that. Is that sometimes you have these thoughts and they're ill-defined, but like when you just fucking let it bleed out your mouth, you understand them better once you hear yourself say it. I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess that makes some sense.
Yeah, because you find out quickly in the times where it doesn't. Because like I think it's something that, especially now, like when we started doing podcasts back in 2016, 2017, we thought it was too late.
Yeah.
Right. Now, a large in part due to the fact that like close friends of ours down the street were already like quite ahead of the game. Like Mind Pump was already fairly well established, obviously know where they're at now. But if there was no other benefit than being able to work on the delivery of the stuff that we think we know and solidifying some of the stuff that we think we know. And I think that's where like a lot of people get tied up when it comes to social media with like metrics. And it's so funny because objective, subjective, quantity, quality, these are inescapable principles. Like science and religion, you could literally boil down, you know, every argument to just this, what is your value set based off of, right? So if some people start a podcast, then we were not necessarily, I don't think we were necessarily different than most. Like we started it the same day we kind of shook hands. I don't know what the fuck we did, high five. We're like, we're going to start a business, but let's start this podcast first while we figure out the business stuff, because the barrier of entry to just getting a microphone, so we thought, was going to be quite low for those who weren't stupid.
Yeah.
And so
we
struggled, as you'd imagine, and as we kind of continue to do. But I think a lot of people miss, like when we teach stuff about exercise and qualitative interpretations, like they miss the subjective component. It's like this podcast, even if it never, and we don't really monetize, we have a couple of sponsors that we work with, and I mean, shout out Marek Health. If you want to get blood work done, shout out Marek Health.
I'm just going to be so happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know they do good work, but it's like we worked with Vivo Barefoot for a bit.
Yeah.
And it was great while it lasted. I like their products. That's why you work with them. But like, it's not like this is going to cut to some fucking commercial. And so it's not like, look, we don't make any money off this. Realistically, like, we co-own Prescript with Matt Penny, and that's our business, and that's what we do. And we kind of do this. I'm sure it feeds into it. But even if it didn't, still in my mind, I've made so much. I'm just gonna say it, like I think I've made so much money off of this podcast just from when someone asked me a question and you and I have like worked it out in real time, and I have an answer that's not a first draft, right? I have at least a second draft, and over the years, man, like you look through some of these titles and like I have a polished fucking like laminated cue card in behind my eyes, and I go, oh, this question, yeah, I know this one. And I think where people are weighing out the pros and cons of starting a podcast or even social media efforts in general, I think that gets so devalued, so pushed aside, so washed out. And it's like, I think if anything, that is, I mean, obviously with us, it has a direct correlation into our business because that is our business. Cogent, concise descriptions of things that people don't understand. It's like, well, yeah, this is a great proving ground for ideas. And sometimes it's a great proving ground for ideas to go die. But regardless, whatever comes out is still more polished than if I were just like, as you said, bleed out of my mouth my first inception of my answer to a particular question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think social media is an interesting intersection of like podcasting is, of course, long form, and it's you working it out in real time or me working it out in real time and taking an idea that maybe we hadn't ever considered or thought about and just leading someone through that thought process of doing so, of this is how I would approach this. I think there's a ton of value to that. But I think it takes a special type of person to be able to sit down and listen to that and digest a podcast. And I think it's been really good for Prescript, our business, because we attract those type of people because they hear the thought process, they hear us working through it, and it's the long form answer. But a lot of what's popular now or what people consume now is short form. It's, at the extreme of that, it's like Twitter and TikTok. But I think most people are on Instagram as well. And I think something that's been interesting for me, because I've been putting out a lot more Instagram content lately, like with the intention of growing my following, which is like a dumb thing. But I understand it's part of the game. So if you're going to play the game, fucking win the game. But it's a very different type of tone that you have to take for people to listen to you on each of these different platforms. And like Instagram, it's got to be concise. It's got to be attention grabbing, concise. It has to be a well-formed thought, because no one's going to listen to you in, I don't know, 30 seconds on Instagram, kind of work through what you're trying to say. It's like, no, you better have that shit figured out and you better get right to the point. As opposed to something like this, it's like, well, I don't know, let's think about it. And here's how I'm going to think about it. So it's depending on the audience that you're talking to, you're going to have a different approach to it. And the dumb word, but the accurate word, the content creation kind of needs to take into consideration why people are there, the type of person it's attracting, and the message that you want to be able to convey to them. And I think the message we can convey here, which is very unique to a lot of other platforms, is not necessarily this is the answer, but this is how I think about arriving at the answer.
Yeah, just a PSA for those of you listening at home. Today's concise message, if you haven't been following Red, White, and Jiunta, is this is your daily reminder to not be such a little bitch. So like,
I'm concerned. I'm fucking concerned. There's so many people on the internet that really like me calling them a bitch.